Brad Bangle.
With Battletoads as a whole, my first inclination was to create a comparison video similar to the Battletoads Double Dragon episode I did last month. The problem, however, is that the Battletoads releases are a bit complicated in that not all the games released are ports, strictly speaking. A fine example would be Battletoads for the Game Boy. Even though the cover art was the same as the NES version, it was in fact a spin-off title and a completely different game, and another Game Boy release titled Battletoads in Ragnarok's World, while technically a port of the original, had several changes and was scaled down significantly, only consisting of 7 levels instead of the original 12. The Super Nintendo got Battletoads and Battle Maniacs, and even though it featured reworked versions of the original's levels, the story and individualized character mechanics meant that the game was more of a new chapter for the series as opposed to a port. The actual port took shape in the form of a Sega Genesis port, the Genesis version looking like the original but with better graphics, and a shitty Amiga version where the game couldn't have sound effects and music going at the same time. Fucking hell. And then you got ports of the ports, such as the Sega Master System version of the SNES Battle Maniacs game, which turned out to be a glitch-riddled, unfinished mess, although I do like the Toad animations. Well, I will undoubtedly circle back round to some of the other versions in a future episode, but for today I decided to check out the little-known Battletoads Arcade game, developed by Rare and published by future galactic empire of video game publishers Electronic Arts. The Battletoads Arcade game was a different beast entirely. Because Rare didn't intend on releasing home versions of the game, it had carte blanche as to what content the arcade version could consist of, with the result that what we got was a super violent and uncensored Battletoads experience. As Battletoads Arcade only came onto my radar recently, during my research for my Battletoads Double Dragon episode in fact, I was pleasantly surprised to see stills of this game and was impressed by its visuals and high levels of violence. Where was this game during my childhood? Certainly not at my local arcade, and I can only imagine how mind-blowing it must have been back in 1994, but for whatever reason Battletoads Arcade seems to have disappeared into the long-lost graveyard of obscure arcade games of the 90s. Given the gratuitous levels of violence, the game mechanics in Battletoads Arcade shifted focus away from having to memorize insane pattern-orientated sequences as seen in the original NES game, speeder bike and snake levels come to mind, and instead focused on weapons and combat, making the arcade game the most action-packed installment to date. The gameplay really is quite relentless, as you will be kicking the shit out of mutants and freaks non-stop from start to finish. The final stage being a special kind of bullet hell insanity, Battletoads Arcade was undoubtedly a coin muncher of note, as I was continuously upping my credits throughout my recent playthrough. So while Battletoads Arcade is certainly not as hard as the original NES version, just you try and complete this game with 5 credits or less and see how far that gets you. Unlike previous installments, you're given the choice of playing with all 3 Toads, and the game also features 3-player co-op as well. Each of the Toads handles differently, but all use the same 2-button jump and attack mechanic, and pushing twice in any direction rapidly will cause your Toad to break into a run. Of the 3 Toads, Pimple is the muscle, Rash is the fastest, and Zits is the balanced all-rounder, but fundamentally they're all the same, and I never stuck to one character while working my way through the game, oftentimes cycling between the 3 every time I was killed off. As is common with the Battletoads franchise, there is a host of outlandish moves that the Toads are capable of, thanks to their morphing abilities. Only with the arcade version, those moves have had an ultra-violent upgrade. So while there are still the typical big fists and drop kick boots etc, there are also spiked boot kicks, mace roundhouse kicks, spiked knuckle punches, giant anvils and more, and the nice thing is that every Toad has his own set of unique attacks, and some moves are quite literally ball-bustingly vicious. There are also plenty of pickups such as concrete encased poles that can be used as clubs, and hell, there's even guns. Some of the devices you get to use, such as the jetpacks, can be extraordinarily bloody, such as this, and there are plenty of nifty little touches such as the fourth wall breaking kicks that send bad guys hurtling towards the screen, and even boot prints left behind as a result of those kicks. The level structure of Battletoads has enough variety to ensure that the game stays interesting from start to finish. While the majority of the game does use the typical platformer beat-em-up approach, the game starts off extremely strong as you are required to defend Professor T-Bird's Vulture battleship in the midst of an all-out space battle. There are also vertically orientated levels such as the snow stage, where you're making your descent towards the lair of a giant space snake called Karnath, a name you may be familiar with from the original NES Battletoads, the familiar Wookiee hole level where turbo cables have been swapped out in favor of jetpacks, a Street Fighter inspired bonus level where you need to bust up a rat fighter, and a stage where you're hitching a ride on a small spacecraft through the bowels of a mechanical fortress. These types of levels offer a welcome departure from the typical beat-em-up fare and provide a level of variety not seen in many games of this ilk. While I did think the Toad's movement was a little awkward in the beginning, in particular Rash's as he does this kind of sideways crab waddle walk, you'll forget all about that in no time due to the fun-filled and blood-soaked symphony of carnage you will unleash at a near constant rate. Battletoads Arcade is just a shitload of unadulterated fun. Do you ever see a Ninja Turtle carve up a foot soldier with a circular saw blade? Yeah, I didn't think so. The audio design is pretty great in Battletoads Arcade as well, the level 1 track being particularly good and really gets you into the knuckle blooding mood. As a whole, the tracks are rather eclectic as opposed to having an overarching theme, and each of the 6 levels seem to have tracks that correspond to the content and theme of the level in question. The sound effects are on par too, as each punch, kick and concrete crushing blow sounds generously meaty and satisfying, and the inclusion of voice work is welcomed too. Needless to say, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the game's visuals, because Battletoads Arcade has some great graphics undoubtedly representing the pinnacle of the series. In the typical Battletoads fashion, each level begins with some smack talk from the end of level boss, and these are presented by detailed character portraits. The levels themselves are all brimming with activity right from the get-go on T-Bird's battleship. There's countless spaceships at war as laser blasts streak across the screen, the foreground is in a constant state of movement as your ship moves through space, and the craft itself is detailed, covered in battle damage and various flashing lights and so forth. This attention to detail is carried throughout the game, from the Dark Queen's ship, creepy Wookiee hole, Dark Queen's mansion and its boss portraits and rolling 3D balls of death, to cruising through Robo-Manus's impressively armed mechanical fortress on a small spacecraft that has an impressive 3D tilting effect. During a time where Rare had begun experimenting with 3D graphics, Battletoads Arcade was the first Rare game that used Power Animator long before it was implemented in Killer Instinct or Donkey Kong Country, the latter subsequently popularizing the impressive 3D SGI technology. The boss battles are some of the most challenging and best looking ones out of any of the Battletoads games. Big Blag is the sweatiest and fat fuckiest he's ever been in this installment. The writhing 3D snakiness of Karnath is impressive to say the least. And then there's the spectacular yet incredibly grueling final confrontation with Robo-Manus, which I did find a bit odd as I was expecting the Dark Queen to rock up, but alas she does not. I guess you just had to be content with kicking the shit out of her in the previous installments. With all that said and done, it's a wonder that Battletoads Arcade didn't do well. It was supposedly completed and shelved for quite some time before its release, and was a financial failure despite being well received by critics and gamers alike. Even today, its inclusion on the Rare Replay collection for Xbox One was lauded. Guess it's just one of those things. Battletoads Arcade is the definitive Battletoads experience, an action-packed, blood-soaked, no-hold-barred gem set apart from previous installments due to its strong emphasis on combat as opposed to pattern retention. It's definitely not the longest Battletoads entry. I mean, you can finish it in around an hour, but man, it's just so much fun, and you want to play through it multiple times, and of course it's co-op too. Battletoads is definitely still good today and deserves all the recognition in the world as one of the best beat-em-ups around. If the Rare Replay collection isn't an option for you, then MAME has you covered, so do yourself a favor and check this one out. That's it for this week. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up, drop a comment below and subscribe. Until next time, cheers.